Back in the 1980s, my dad and a buddy decided to travel the world. They went to a number of places, including Japan, South Korea, Thailand, Taiwan, Australia, and New Zealand. It was in Australia where my dad and his friend were approached by a man. He was tall, about the same height as my dad, with black hair and a moustache. Now, note that it was obvious that they were tourists. They had their backpacks on and a Canadian flag patch on each. A man approached the two of them and struck up a conversation. My dad says instantly he got a bad vibe from the guy, but for the sake of being polite, my dad and his friend, who isn't known for his sense of self-preservation, continued chatting to him. The man asked my dad and his friend if they had any place to stay. When they admitted they didn't, the man said, "You know, I've got a buddy who lives just a short bit away. In fact, there's a whole community who loves tourists. I'll give you two a ride." Dad instantly got red flags, and they told the guy no. He seemed to get pissed and kept insisting, but Dad and his friend kept insisting that they would be fine. Finally, he left, and the two found somewhere else to stay. Years later, Dad told me this story, and I got curious and decided to do some digging. I went onto a Wikipedia page, and I pointed out the picture of the man to Dad, and it matched. The man that they encountered was Ivan Milat, a serial killer who was famous for the backpacker murders. His first killing started in 1989 when my dad and his friend went to Australia. He has killed approximately between 7 to 12 people. I'm glad that my dad listened to his gut and they didn't go with him. Otherwise, he would have never met my mother and later adopted me and my little sister. I hate to think that my dad and his friend could have been the first victims of a serial killer. I'm staying with my future brother-in-law. His house is 10 miles from town and a mile from the closest neighbour. My sister spends the weekends here. It started a few days ago. We had just got home from work. I sat down and I heard someone repeatedly saying hello at the front door. I got up to answer it. My brother-in-law told me to stop and look out the window, which I did. And the strange thing was, there was no one there. He said to ignore it and not open the door unless I can see someone there. Sometimes at night, I swear I can hear a girl crying outside the laundry room. He said that it's just a deer. I've never heard a deer sound like that before though. My sister has heard it too, but she says it almost sounded like a teenage girl was repeating "Winyan." I spoke to my sister and she insists that her fiancé, my future brother-in-law, would never put us in any danger. My brother-in-law just says not to go outside if I hear anything and to never try to speak to it. I checked into the history of the house and general area, and nothing stands out. I don't smoke, drink, or do drugs. There's also carbon monoxide detectors, so that's not a problem. I asked him if it was something of the Wendigo skinwalker nature. He said skinwalkers are Navajo, Wendigo are Cree, not Sioux, and not to speak about this subject at night. He said that if I'm that curious, he'll show me. So at about 9 that night, we went outside. His neighbour Peter lives a mile away, joined us. Apparently, whatever it is likes to do the same thing at his house. He's too scared to leave his wife and kids home alone when the power goes out. We were pretty deep in the woods when my brother-in-law stopped and made a dove call. It was answered by the same call a few seconds later. There's no doves here in January. That's when the knock started, and it moved from tree to tree with no real pattern, and we still couldn't see anything. And then, all of a sudden, there was this overwhelming sense of dread. Peter and I looked at each other, then hightailed it back to the house. Peter is completely flipping his shit and goes home. I asked my brother-in-law what's going on, and he said that he's not quite sure. It started last winter, and he's never seen it, but he'd like to make noises outside the stables at work. It went away during the spring and the summer, then started up again here. He also said that the same thing used to happen to him when he was a child, up until 15. But just one thing bothers me. He got back to the house 2 minutes after Peter and I did. There is no way that I'm faster than my brother-in-law, and Peter's close to 50, so there's no way that he outran a 24-year-old. What was he doing out there alone with whatever that is for 2 minutes? I asked him, and he said that he shot at it, but I didn't hear a gun, and neither did Peter. I was a 10-year-old boy when this all happened, and I can't remember everything. I was living in a small city in Illinois. My family and I lived in this big house in a quiet neighborhood. Our house is the only 2 houses on a street corner, and our backyard was huge. There are only 2 houses and a big forest behind us, which is about 150 feet away. Our family is big. I had 3 brothers and 1 sister. About a year after we moved in, it was snowing a lot, and we played in the snow outside. One day, my sister and I decided to play in the snow. My brothers were playing video games in their room. We went outside and it was getting dark. My mum told us to only play outside for an hour or so. My sister and I were playing snowball fights, and I was chasing her and hitting her with a snowball. But then, I noticed something out in the distance. I saw a figure, a big, dark, shadowy figure. I chose to ignore it, which was a big mistake. I continued to play with my sister, but I never told my parents after. A month passes by and it was January, and my sister and I were getting ready for school. It was early in the morning, and it was lightly snowing outside, and was a bit dark. Our bus stop was down the street on the right turn, then another street down, and then a left turn. My sister and I were walking down the street with our big jackets, heavy boots, and warm gloves on. When we went down the street on the right turn, then to the other street, we saw a man walking towards us. I can't see what he looks like, but I remember he was wearing a black, dirty, and ripped jacket. His hair was dirty and messy, and his beard was big, brown, messy, and scuffy. Also, he had a weird smirk on his face, and something in his hand that I couldn't quite make out. As he was getting closer, I noticed that it was a knife in his hand, which terrified my sister and I. We both stood there, not knowing what to do, but something told me in my gut to run away from this stranger. I quickly grabbed my sister's hand and turned to run and didn't dare to look back. We were running down the street to the left of our house, but suddenly my sister slipped on the ice and fell on her face. She started to cry and was hurt bad. I told her to get up, but she just continued to sit there and cry. And when I looked back, the man was running towards us. I was really scared for my sister and my life. I didn't know what to do. And then, suddenly, a police car came behind us, and the man ran away. A tall, white police officer came out of the car and walked towards us. "What's wrong, kids?" the officer said with a concerning voice. We were chased by a man, and my sister fell down," I said with a terrified voice, holding my sister's hand. The officer looked at us and picked up my sister and carried her to the police car. I followed him, and he put my sister in the passenger seat of the car, and I went inside with her. "What's your name, kid? What happened to you and your sister?" said the police officer while I was putting a blanket on us. I replied, "We were walking down the street to our bus stop, but a man started to chase us with a knife." "Okay, how about I take you and your sister to the station so we can tell your parents? You can give us a description of the man." We went down to the station and they called our parents. When they arrived, they were worried sick and we hugged them. I tried to give a description of the man, but it wasn't enough. They looked for the man in our area, but they never found him. And I don't know if this is the same man, but 1 week later, my mum told me that a few kids were kidnapped and the police never found them, or the kidnapper. Years later, as I'm writing this, I always think back to that moment and wonder what would have happened if the police officer never came. My name is Matthew. Before I get to the story, here's some background. I'm part of a large family that consisted of me, both of my parents, and 3 little brothers. And at the time this happened, we were living in a small neighborhood in a large old house. This house was one of the first to be built in the neighborhood. So, here's what happened. This all happened in mid-2014. Now, in all the years that we lived in our house, we never really saw or experienced anything weird or paranormal. so all of this is my first personal experience. So about 2 weeks into the summer, my mum had been driving home and found a yard sale. At this yard sale was an older looking chair that, according to her, she fell in love with. She bought the chair and told them that my father and me would be back to pick it up in a little bit. So about an hour and a half later, my dad gets home and we head over to get this chair. It looked like something that an elderly woman would have in her room at a retirement home. I cannot remember all the details of the chair, but I'll say that it was pretty nice. So we get into the home and put it in the living room, which is on the second floor. I should also probably mention that the house we lived in, my grandparents lived on the bottom floor, and we lived on the top 2 floors. Fast forward about 3 weeks after we got this chair, my mum and dad had left the house to go shopping, and me being the older 15-year-old brother was left at home to watch my 3 brothers. Now, 2 of my brothers were up in their room playing video games on their PS3, while I was downstairs in the living room playing on my Xbox 360 online with some friends while listening from my youngest brother who was also upstairs sleeping in his crib, which was in his room. I had one of those baby monitor things. For those who don't know what it is, it's like a one-way radio, so you can hear a baby if they're awake, but you can't talk to them. So my parents had been gone for about an hour. I was still playing video games when I hear my baby brother start to cry. So I tell my friends I had to get off because my brother was awake, and then I turned the Xbox off. This is when I heard something that honestly freaked me out until this day. I heard what sounded like a woman talking to my little brother. She was saying things like, "It's okay," and "Don't cry." This freaked me out. I ran upstairs, stopping by my room to grab my metal baseball bat just in case. I get upstairs and walk into his room, and no one was there except for my little brother, who at this point was no longer crying. I looked everywhere upstairs and couldn't find anything. I know for a fact that no one would have been able to come downstairs, because the stairs were in the far corner of the floor, and you would have to walk down the hallway in order to go down another set of stairs so that you could leave. This isn't the only thing that happened though. Over the course of the next 3 weeks, I began hearing what sounded like semi-loud footsteps coming from upstairs. They normally would start, go for about 5 minutes, and then stop. Now, I thought I was hearing things and never really thought too much about it. The next thing that happened though, I wasn't at home for, and only heard this from my mum. I had gone to my friend's house for the weekend. My mum and dad were at home with all of my brothers. My mum was in her office working. She was a bookkeeper for a company, and she had the baby sleeping in his room, and had the baby monitor sitting next to her. While she was working, she heard my brother crying, so she entered the last few things she needed to, and started to get up and walk out of the room. She headed upstairs and said that she could hear someone saying something to my baby brother. My mum started to pick up the pace and went into his room, and again, no one was in there. I got home later that night, and my parents told me that we needed to talk in their room. So I headed in there and they asked me if I'd ever heard anything strange the last few weeks or saw anything weird. So I decided to tell them what happened with the baby monitor and my brother. Needless to say, after I got done telling the story to my mum, she was scared out of her mind. My dad said that he had been hearing the footsteps upstairs, but that was it. My mum's first thought was that something had changed in the house to make things like this start happening. My mum thought and thought, and the only thing that we had done recently was bring that chair into the house. She jumped to the conclusion of the chair being haunted or something, and that we needed to get rid of it. So the next day, we took the chair to my dad's work and threw it away in the dumpster. And nothing else happened. Now fast forward to early next year, and we had bought a different house in a different neighborhood. We went by the house to grab the last of our things, which wasn't much. It was me, my best friend, and my dad. My dad was already out of the house putting things in the car. My friend and I were tasked with going in and locking everything up. The entire time we were in the house, I had a feeling like I was being watched, and according to my friend, he did too. As we were about to head outside, we heard what sounded like loud footsteps running at us from down the hall. And at that point, me and my friend basically said fuck this, and ran to the door and locked it and shut it, running to the car. As we looked out of the window at the house, I swear I saw what looked like a lady standing at the door watching us leave. I refuse to go back there to this day. About 5 years ago, I moved in with my boyfriend and his parents. They were the first family to live in that house, but it still had an eerie feeling to it, especially when alone. The house was really big. Well, to my standards anyway. It had sitting rooms, a huge kitchen, 4 bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms, and a newly finished basement, which is where my boyfriend and I tended to spend our time. When you were in the basement, you could hear anyone above you. The floor was so creaky in specific places that no one could go down there unheard. This is important later on. We were in college while living there, so it was common for one of us to go out while the other one stayed in to do homework or study. There were 2 events that I'm really disturbed by, and to this day, I don't like staying overnight in that house. Both nights I was in the basement alone. My boyfriend's parents were asleep in their room, but the house is so big that they may as well have been gone. And there's no way that I'd wake them up saying what I'm about to say here anyways. First time I got really spooked, I was doing a lab report on the carpet. It's normally cold down there, so I had the gas fireplace going, which is controlled by a remote. I set up to stretch, and the flame fucking exploded out of nowhere. There's a glass plate in front of the flames, which kept the basement from catching fire. But behind the glass, the flames moved in a way that I'd never seen before, and still haven't to this day. I jumped up and turned the fire off as quick as I could. I went right up to our room and tried to forget that it happened. The second time, I was reading after finishing up some homework. Again, my boyfriend is out. Remember how I mentioned the creaking floors? Well, I was reading and I hear someone coming down the basement stairs. Thinking back, I should have heard him come in, or at least some movement beforehand from the floor above, but I was into my book and just said, "Hey love," when he reached the bottom, to which I got no response. At this point, I'm freaking out. Since the couches face away from the stairs, my back is to whoever who has just come down. As I go to turn, someone grabbed my head. It was without a doubt a palm, and pushes my head into my book. With a little gasp, I turned to see nothing. Nothing at all. I booked it upstairs and hid in my bed, trying to calm down when I swear on everything that I've ever known that those horrible fucking footsteps started in the hallway and then proceeded up the stairs to the outside of my bedroom door. And it fucking opened. I was quietly crying by this point and just waiting for whatever it was to just enter the room and give me the heart attack that I knew was coming, when it never did. Again, there was nothing there. I know this is hard to believe, but to me, this is all true. I have no other explanation for these events, besides something in that house that really doesn't like me. It was winter and I lived somewhere pretty cold, so the windows were all closed. And I know it sounds crazy, but there is no way that that door could have opened on its own. And those footprints were as real as my own. The fireplace could have malfunctioned, but it has never happened again. I asked my boyfriend after my experiences if he had any odd stories and told me that there was once a punching bag in the basement that could be seen from the top of the stairs. He looked into the basement one day and swears that someone punched it with an incredible force. It wasn't simply swinging, which wouldn't make sense anyway. It was moving with momentum. This incident happened to me and my friends when we were 16 years old, just after we got our moped driving licenses. Because we live in a little area away from the city and there's not a lot of police around, our mopeds were illegally modified to go 80 kilometers an hour when the legal top speed is 45 kilometers an hour. And if we hadn't have modified them, we could be dead or kidnapped right now. I'm 18 now and I'll try to write this with as much detail as possible. So me and my 2 good friends decided to go ride our mopeds into the woods at one early evening, but I wasn't too big on going because the chain on my moped kept jumping off the sprocket, thus causing me to get off my moped and fix it all the time. But it normally doesn't take me more than 2 minutes. So we debated about do we go or not. We ended up deciding that we should go. We headed for this dirt road that separates to multiple paths. We had explored almost all of them, so of course, we went on the one that we hadn't explored yet. As we go on riding this path for like 2 to 3 kilometers, my chain fell off. We had to stop. we decided we would rest for a bit and look around. We walked for a bit down the path and noticed that it separates into two different paths. We wanted to explore both of them, but it was getting kind of dark, so we would only explore one of them. We walk back to our mopeds and start riding down the path. The guy who leads the pack decides which path we took. I was the first one, so I decided we'd go left because it looked like there was more woods that way. But as we ride for like 1 kilometer, we come across a dirt road. At first, we were thinking maybe we should go back, because these usually are someone's private roads. But we decided to ride down it and see what was there. We had only gone half a kilometer and there was a yard. We stopped and thought twice about going to take a look or not. And being stupid 16-year-olds, of course, we went to take a look. When we got to the yard, we noticed that the house looked old and abandoned, but none of the windows were broken, which was kind of rare on an abandoned house. It was super creepy to be in this yard, because it was really dark now. So we were going to leave after we smoked our cigarettes, but then we see car lights coming down the dirt road, so we ran and pushed our mopeds behind some bushes. The car came to the yard and a guy got out, and we sat low behind the bushes and watched him walk up to the house and go in. Me and my friends were kind of freaking out because we were trespassing. We were a bit confused though as to why the guy was using a flashlight inside the house and not turning on the house lights. We sat there silent and tried to think about what to do. I know the answer sounds easy, that we should have pushed our mopeds to the dirt road, started them and drive the hell out of there. But it wasn't that simple. The car was parked in front of the dirt road, and we weren't sure if we would fit past it. As we were considering what to do next, our thinking was interrupted by a man's scream coming from inside the house. We were instantly terrified and froze. We needed to get the fuck out of here, fast. We didn't know what was going on inside that house, and honestly, we didn't want to know. We panicked and got the mopeds up and started them. Me and my other friend got ours started. We see a flashlight pointing at the window. We yelled at our friend to start his moped. It felt like minutes, but really, it was like 3 seconds. We start riding towards the dirt road, and luckily, we just got past the car, and I look back and I see the guy bolting to his car. We were going like 75 to 80 kilometers an hour on this dirt road with this maniac chasing us. I began thinking, if my chain drops off now, I'm as good as dead. So I tried to avoid any bumps and rocks on the road. Luckily for us, the dirt road ran into asphalt road. But the guy was still chasing us, and now on the asphalt, he was right on our ass. So we took any turn that we saw. We went right into a playground, and we saw the guy stop his car just outside of it. We stopped in the middle and tried to see his plate number, but it was just too dark. The guy was still sitting there, just staring at us. We ride off and see him getting out of his car and walking into the playground. At this point, we knew we weren't in trouble anymore, so we went to our other friend's house and were freaking the fuck out. We were contemplating about what the fuck was going on in that house. It had to be something serious because the lights were off, and we definitely heard a man scream. We called the police and they said that they were going to check it out. An hour goes by and they call back and tell us that they saw no evidence of any kind of fight or abuse. But why the scream and all that chasing then? Did the guy go back and clean up in such a little amount of time? And what would have happened if my chain had dropped during the chase? I guess we'll probably never know. I'll be the first to admit that I've made some stupid choices in my life. I used to catfish people with celebrities, but like lower key celebrities that weren't super popular. One of the main people I used was Bill Cowlitz from Tokyo Hotel. I actually catfished people as him for 2 years. I know, I made a lot of mistakes, and I know that it was really fucked up to make people think that they were talking to their idol the way I did. But I thought I was good at what I was doing, and as long as I didn't get too close to people, I wouldn't have a problem, you know? That was all well and good until I started to get attached to someone. I should preface this part of the story by saying that I used to talk to people on a website called Ning. It was kind of like MySpace or Facebook, but for specific fandoms. so everyone on there loved Tokyo Hotel, and I had a lot of them fooled. There was a small group of people on that group that I talked to pretty regularly as both Bill and Tom, but more often as Bill. It was about 7 or 8 people that thought that they were talking to the boys. I had gotten pretty good at mimicking Bill's speaking voice and everything, so I had them pretty well fooled. But this one girl, she was super charismatic and friendly, and like obsessed over Tokyo Hotel's schedule, and would message me when she knew Bill was on stage and whatever. I think, in hindsight, that she was trying to catch me in the act, but at the time, I thought she was just being sweet. I'll call her Daya for this story. Daya was really friendly. She told Bill things that she said she hadn't told anyone. So I, in turn, made up things about Bill, but based them off my life, because it felt like I had a friend that I could talk to, even if she didn't know I was me. We talked for a few months. She would constantly send me manips of her and Bill, and we would talk on the phone from a pinger. It was an LA number that I had gotten, so she didn't know I was in the middle of nowhere, Virginia. I thought I was safe, and I thought that she was talking to Bill. She said she was from Florida, so that was so far away from Virginia, and I didn't really think anything of it. And so, I might have let my guard down. I'm not sure. I don't really know where I went wrong, but Daya disappeared for a couple of days. She lived with a big family, and would often disappear if there was a family drama or if something happened, so I didn't think too much about it. Besides, why would a celebrity worry too much about a random girl he met online? I didn't want to seem clingy. When she reappeared on Yahoo Messenger, Daya started talking about her best friend had lied to her and how she was going to kill her friend, and then kill herself, and how she had run away from home so she could prove the truth to everyone that was involved in the lie. I tried to talk her down, trying to figure out what was going on. Of course, my heart was sinking further with every second, because I was presently lying to her. Next thing I knew, she started sending me files. At first, I didn't notice what I was looking at as the pictures started being transferred through. And then, I saw my road. My little back road in the middle of nowhere. I tried to brush that off and thought that it could be any road. I asked her why she was showing me this. I clicked more pictures when she didn't answer right away. I saw my dog in my backyard. My dog that I had used for pictures of Bill's dog because he had the same breed, and it was convenient to make things more believable. Then I saw my house, my mum's car sitting in the driveway. Everything was so familiar. There was no way that I could have been mistaken in what I was seeing. I messaged her then, asking, "How did you get this?" By that point, I was sure that I didn't even have a leg to stand on. I was prepared to come clean about everything and apologize profusely. But more pictures came through, and these ones were the ones that ruined me. She sent me pictures of me, taken from outside my window. Pictures of me on my laptop with Bill's account open on my screen. Pictures of me wearing jewelry that I had shown in pictures because it was the same style he wore. Pictures of me typing on Yahoo Messenger with the other people I talked to's names showing in the tabs. It was the last one that got me the most though. It was a zoomed in picture of me, wearing the same shirt that I was wearing that night. My back to the window and my laptop screen, showing the picture of my house that she had sent me moments earlier. I shut my laptop slowly, getting up from my chair without looking to the window. I walked out of my room to talk to my mum and told her not to go outside, but to call the cops immediately. They arrived about 20 minutes later and couldn't find anyone on the property or any footsteps. But they found a knife that they took in as evidence. I deleted all of my Catfish accounts that night, got rid of the phone number that I was using to talk to people, and never looked back to see if Daya told people what happened. I never heard from Daya again, but that moment was absolutely terrifying. I still have nightmares about that night sometimes, and I still wonder what would have happened if Daya had gotten close enough to me. I know I've made some horrible choices, and I should be punished for what I did, but I don't think I deserve to die for it or anything. To this day, I can't listen to Tokyo Hotel without getting chills up my spine, as Daya's messages flood back into my brain, which sucks because I have a tattoo dedicated to the band. A little backstory. I'm a female, and by now 30 plus years of age, but this happened back when I was 16 or 17. I had just started going to a new school, and my mum and I, had just moved from a big house to a small apartment so that we could afford to travel more, and it was closer to my school. To understand the story, here's a basic explanation of the apartment. When you enter from the front door, my room was at the end of a long hallway to the left, and directly facing my door was the entry to the living room. My mum's room was directly to the left of the front door, and facing her door was the short corridor to the kitchen and the bathroom. And well, the money we saved from moving to a smaller place wasn't worth it in the end. So, on to the story. Soon after we moved in, both my mum and I started to get depressed. The apartment never really felt at home. My room in particular was always cold for some reason. My mum tried to fix the radiator, but as soon as we got it going, it broke again. She even called the landlord to have him fix it, and he did. But 2 days later, it went cold again. My mum was still working late some evenings, and since we live in the north, it gets dark rather quick in the winter. I had just come home from school, made some lunch, and sat down on the couch to watch some TV. Now, from the couch, I can see into my room, since the living room is facing my room. When I sat there, I got the distinct feeling of someone watching me. You know, when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and you get goosebumps. I looked into my room, expecting to actually see someone, but the doorway was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was looking back at me angrily. I looked back at the TV, trying to ignore the feeling, but it just wouldn't go away. So I moved to another place on the couch, not visible from my room, and the feeling stopped. Another time, I was chilling in my room, listening to some music on my portable CD player. Again, this was in the early 2000s. MP3s weren't as affordable as today. I was reading a magazine while listening, when suddenly, the music stopped. I looked at my CD player, and it was paused. That's odd, I thought. I pushed play again, and the music started up again, but only for a few seconds. I found it strange since my CD player had never done this before. I pushed play again, only to find it pausing itself yet another time. Now I was starting to get agitated. "What is wrong with you?" I muttered. I took the disc out and restarted the machine, and held it in my hands, looking at it, and pushed play. The music started, and I put it down beside me and picked up the magazine again. The music was going on for maybe another minute when the CD player started acting up again, pausing itself. Now I was really irritated. Maybe it's the batteries. I went out of my room to get some new ones. Just as I stepped out of the room, I felt really warm. I hadn't noticed it, but I was cold. Like I'd been standing outside in the cold weather without a jacket. As I said before, my room was always cold, but this happened during summer, so it shouldn't be that cold. I thought that I could sit on the couch with my mum since it was warmer in the rest of the apartment. I sat on the couch with my magazine and CD player, and it played as usual. I thought, great, it's working again. When it was time for bed, I had forgotten about my CD player acting up, and went to bed thinking that I wanted to listen to some music before I fell asleep. I had pushed the play button when it got paused again. I got really agitated again and said to myself to get a new one since it's fucking broken. A few days later, I was doing my homework in the kitchen, and I've always found it relaxing to listen to classical music when I do my homework. Since I was sitting in the kitchen, I figured I'd give my CD player another try. I hadn't bought a new one yet, and it worked fine. No problems at all. Maybe it's just a coincidence it's working now. Hours later, when it was time for bed, I took the CD player with me again to see if it was still working, and I could listen to it in my room for a good 15 minutes. Then, suddenly, it paused itself again. What the fuck? Maybe by now, I should have seen the connection with the pausing only happening in my room, but I thought the CD player was just broken. But a few days later, it was going to get worse. The night that this happened, I'm positive it was a Friday, because I had been to school that day, but we were free the next day. I can't remember much before bedtime. Usual day, I suppose. But what happened in that room that night, I will remember forever. To understand the situation, you need to know some stuff about my room. My bed was in the corner to the right, and as my nightstand, I use a dresser that is higher than a normal nightstand. My room could never get pitch black, since my blinds are white and thin, and there's a streetlight just under my window. Now, I know I was asleep when a noise made me wake up, but slowly, like when you're underwater and slowly rising to the surface. A muffled voice yelling. I can't make out what it's saying until I reach the surface and hear the phrase, "and people like you," in a female voice. At these words, I opened my eyes and looked into something black. I remember thinking, where is my dresser? Sounds kind of stupid, but that's what came to mind. I look up to see a shadow leaning over me. This got me so scared that I grabbed my covers and pulled them over my eyes. As I did this, I could feel it getting pulled to the bottom of the bed, so I held onto it as hard as I could. And then, I suddenly felt a huge weight upon me, so I couldn't move. And there was this noise, a real ruckus, like everything in my room was vibrating, like an earthquake. And when I dared to open my eyes, I'm floating above my bed, and I can see my entire room. I also see two shadowy figures at the end of my bed, with long arms and crippled legs. To the left of me, I see a big shadowy figure leaning over my body, and everything was moving, like all the particles within the furniture and walls were alive. I'm sorry, but I really can't describe it any better than that. And all of a sudden, everything went black and quiet, like turning down the volume on a stereo, and I once again felt the covers in my hands and a gentle stroke at the back of my neck, catching some strands of hair, like someone was gently sliding my hair between their fingers. When they let go, everything was quiet again. It took a long time to convince myself to open my eyes, and when I did, there was my dresser, and the room was bathing in the light from the street lamp. It must have been a dream, was my first response. I turned on the light with shaky hands, and when I looked closer at my hands, they were white as snow. Now, I'm naturally pale, but this was different. My hands were white, like all blood had left my veins, and shaking. It must have been a dream, I kept repeating to myself. It must have, or I'm going crazy. I don't think I need to tell you that I didn't sleep much more that night. I turned the TV on mute and watched whatever was on because I didn't want to go back to sleep. Come morning, when I sat down at the kitchen table with my mum, she immediately saw that I wasn't all right. "You didn't sleep well, honey. Are you getting sick? You look pale. Were you in my room last night?" No. Why would I do that?" "I don't know, just to check up on me or something." She was just looking at me weird. "No, honey, I wasn't in your room last night. Why? Did something happen?" At this point, I just broke down in tears, not knowing if I was crazy or if something actually was in my room, or if it was a very vivid dream. My mum comforted me and asked me to tell her what happened. I know that I'm lucky to have her as a mother. She always believes in me. After all, she has raised me to always tell the truth. After I was done with telling her everything, she left the room and fetched some paper and a pen. "Do you think you can try and draw what you saw?" "Maybe, I'll try." And as I drew, my mum's eyes never left the paper. When I drew the two figures with the long arms, she sat down, put her hand on her mouth and just stared at the paper. After I was done, she studied the drawings for some time. "You know, you drew something similar to this when you were 6. Only difference is, you said you didn't like their eyes, that they were staring at you with their big eyes when you tried to go to sleep." I was baffled. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it kind of went away with you getting older. Don't you remember that we switched rooms because you didn't want to sleep in the big room? You said that the toys were moving on their own, so I slept in your room and you in mine." Now that she had mentioned it, I did remember. I started sleeping in my mum's room for some time, but then we switched back. It was so long ago that I had forgotten, but she continued. "When you suddenly started sleeping in your own room again without a fuss, I just kept quiet, not wanting to spark something up again. But now that you're older, I I can tell you. Do you remember the man who looked like Robin Hood? What? When you were maybe 4 or 5, you told me about a man that came to visit you sometimes, and he had a cape and a hat with a feather, just like Robin Hood. I owned some Disney books of various kinds, like Snow White, Robin Hood, and other classical tales. And when we read Robin Hood, I had apparently told my mum that the man had the same hat as Robin Hood. But honestly, I had no memory of this. Well, do you remember the little girl then? She had on a blue dress and a blue ribbon in her hair, and she really liked your toy horse. Still dumbfounded, I said, "Oh no." You were very detailed in your description, and you spoke to them. I could sometimes hear you having long conversations, answering questions and telling stories. At first I thought it was just you playing, but when I listened outside your door one time, I could have sworn that I heard another voice. So, I believe you. Mum, I don't want to sleep in that room anymore. You don't have to. We'll switch rooms, just like we did when you were little. I'm not as susceptible as you, but believe me, I've also seen and heard a few things. From then on, we switched rooms, and I really want to tell you that that was the end of it. But there was still one more thing to come. We only lived in that apartment for a total of 9 months. My mum managed to get a small house outside of town. Sure, it would take me a longer time to get to school, but that was a price that I gladly paid to get away from that place. I still had school, but helped pack up as soon as I got home. As I said, I really wanted to get out of there. My mum had taken a few days off to finish cleaning the apartment and packing the rest of our stuff. Some guys from a moving firm picked up our furniture, and my mum was taking the last few boxes in her car and driving to the new place, where I was to meet her after school. She made sure to repeat it several times to me so I wouldn't forget. After she had cleaned the room, she closed the door to keep track of which room she had cleaned, and also to keep the movers from entering her newly cleaned floors. I had 3 boxes in my room with some of my stuff, and she had 2 in hers. While the floor in the living room was drying, she figured she would carry the boxes to the car. So, she opened the door to her room and carried her boxes to the car. When she got to my room, however, the door wouldn't open. She said it was like someone was blocking the door or something. She gave it all she could and swung the door open. And just then, she said that she felt a hard push in the chest that actually made her stumble backwards. This made her choke, but she was angry, and she shouted, "You got what you want, we're leaving!" And with that, she walked in and took one of the boxes, and nothing else happened. Now, I highly doubt that this was sleep paralysis that both me and my mother experienced, but after this happened, nothing of this magnitude has happened since. It was the summer of 2005, but this experience is burned into my memory as if it happened last month. I was in college, staying for the summer at school at an off-campus house rented by 4 of my fraternity brothers. As such, it was a boisterous house, lots of people coming and going, frequent parties, often loud music, all those sorts of things from young college-age kids. This house was built in 1930, nothing remarkable, located in a small Virginia town with a lot of history. This was a Sunday night, and it wasn't different than usual. All my roommates were out of town. I was alone for the evening. It wasn't the first time I'd been alone, but it was certainly rare for only one person to be in the house. Oftentimes, friends would crash on couches, and there would be more than 4 people who lived there, bounding about. I didn't have anything to drink, watched some TV, and turned into bed around midnight. I usually sleep well. I have never suffered any sort of sleep paralysis or even any frightening nightmares. But on this night, I couldn't fall asleep. I felt like I was being watched. I got up and confirmed all the doors were locked and lights were off and laid back down. As soon as I got back into bed, I saw it and froze in fear. What I saw was difficult to describe, but impossible to forget. It was a black shadow in the silhouette of a person, but that was it. I could tell it was much darker and left an outline to the wall behind it, and when I saw it, chills went up my spine. I couldn't see many features, but could instantly tell that it was looking at me. I'm laying on my back, just frozen in fear. I could physically move, but I was so scared that I just laid as still as possible. Was I just freaking myself out? I don't think I was. The firehouse was down the road, and ambulance and fire trucks frequently drove on the street outside of the window of the room I lived in, on the first floor. I heard the sirens and remained still. The red flashing lights, as the truck drove by, briefly illuminated the room. The outline of the shadow was 100% there. There was no doubt in my mind some sort of dark shadow was in the room at the foot of my bed, looking at me, though I couldn't see any eyes, and I had no doubt it wasn't a living human being. Then it started moving. Not really walking, just sliding slowly but steadily. When I first saw it, it was to my right, just beyond my foot. It was moving to my left. It got to the end of my bed and turned to me, seeming to rotate so its dark head was ever focused and locked on me. Just typing this now gives me chills and goosebumps all these years later. Once it turned, it slowly made its way down the bed, closer to me. I was frozen with fear, praying that it would go away. I considered screaming. I considered running out of the room. I thought about rolling over and pulling the sheets over my head, and just pretending that I was somehow tricking myself into imagining. But I just couldn't, because I knew I wasn't tricking myself. Finally, as it almost got up to me, it seemingly started leaning down, right into my face, a black silhouette, very distinct. I just squeezed my eyes tight and refused to open them. I stayed that way, petrified and awake, but with my eyes closed for what felt like hours. I then slowly opened them, and I couldn't tell if the figure was still close to me or not, but I was so freaked out, I didn't know what was going on. Finally, at first light, I got up and ran out of the house, stopping only to get a shirt and sandals and basically sprinting out. I didn't come back until later when a couple of roommates were back. I repeated to them basically everything I said above, and they thought I was either crazy or tricking myself. Since it was August and summer was almost over, I slept on a couch in the living room for the short time left. I already had plans to move out for the school year to a different apartment, and was so scared that I didn't want to stay in that room ever again. Life sort of settled down after that. Business went on as usual, until the following Saturday afternoon, that is, 6 days after my experience. A group of my friends were relaxing, watching TV when 4 or 5 members of a family, all wearing matching reunion t-shirts, knocked on the door. This house had been in their family a long time ago, and they wondered if we would let them in so that they could walk through it and reminisce. Weird, but sure, they were older and seemed nice, so we let them in. We pretty much just went back to watching TV while they wandered around the house. My room was attached to the living room. Once they walked through the kitchen, one of the older ladies pointed into my room and somewhat said, "Oh, I remember that room. It was cousin so-and-so's room. But her daddy, my Uncle Clarence, would never go in there because he saw a ghost, and he was so shook up that he never messed around in there again." I was absolutely floored. This woman volunteered the information. I didn't even think to ask them if they knew about any sort of weird happenings. At this point, even my buddies were stunned to hear this, and now I was happy I told them about it when I did. I asked if the uncle was prone to making up crazy stories, and she said no. By all accounts, he was a fairly typical family member, not any type of person to come up with weird stories for attention or anything. So before I tell you this story, I'm a tall 5'10" college-age girl who lives and has a very take-no-shit attitude. I am not a small girl, and I definitely don't consider myself physically weak. Yet, this experience still shook me to my bones. This is long, but creepy. So my good friend Jack told me that he met a guy who he thought I'd really get along well with. Jack said he knew this guy Alex decently well from his lifting meets, but that from what he could tell, Alex was a cool guy and super nice. Jack is a good friend of mine, and I've always trusted his judgment. Jack said he had met Alex multiple times, and that Alex had always been super nice and really seemed like a good guy. So, Jack kind of set Alex and I up, Keep in mind throughout this that Alex is a 6'3" and 300-pound powerlifter. Alex and I started talking, simple stuff at first, but it seemed really easy with him. He texted me first most of the time and held good conversations. He was a good-looking guy with similar interests of mine. We also seemed to get along well. He gave me some pet names about a week and a half in, like Baby, but I didn't really mind or think anything of it, as guys tended to do that stuff, and he and I had been pretty flirty with each other. He was very kind and polite with me over the phone, texting and Snapchatting. We got really comfortable with each other and told each other some really deep and personal things. We talk on the phone for multiple hours each night. Things seemed to be going well. After almost 3 weeks of texting and Snapchatting and talking on the phone, Alex and I decided that we should hang out. Now, Alex is a little over 2 hours away, but I agreed to drive and see him if he paid for the gas money. Because he was so far away and we seemed to get along swimmingly, I agreed to spend Saturday and Sunday with him, spending the night at his house. Because I'm a grown woman, I figured spending the night wouldn't be such a big deal. Saturday comes around and I make the drive to meet him. I adore the drive, simply because I love to cruise and listen to music, and the countryside was beautiful. I arrive in his town and find his apartment and park behind his car. I go up and knock on his door, and he opens it and envelops me in a big bear hug, and squeezed me really hard to where my back cracked. I found this odd, but I didn't think too much about it until later on. We sat on his couch and started talking for a bit, but within 5 minutes of me being there, he has his tongue down my throat. We had flirted quite a bit over text, so again, I didn't think too much about it. He tried to undress me, but I pushed his hand off of me and told him not yet. I wanted to actually get to know him a bit before that, but he totally insisted for about 20 minutes, and I gave in, although I wasn't totally comfortable with it. We messed around. It wasn't enjoyable, because I was uncomfortable the entire time. He gave me really weird vibes, and the more I thought about it, the more my stomach hurt. We finished up and he held me as we watched some Netflix. He kept kissing my forehead where my hairline was, and I realized that he was tasting my sweat. This made my stomach churn, and I rolled over so my back was facing him so that he couldn't do it anymore. He soon fell asleep and started snoring. I tried to calm myself and sleep for a while to try not to think about it, hoping that when I woke up, I'd feel better. I mean, he and I had been getting along so well over the phone, right? I was sure I was just being silly. However, when I woke up, I felt worse. My stomach hurt and my skin was crawling, and I just knew that something wasn't right. I slipped out of my bed and went out to the living room to find my phone and my clothes. I got dressed and sat on the couch and texted a group chat with 2 of my really good friends. We tell each other just about everything when it comes to boys, and they had both known that I was going to meet him that weekend. I texted them at 6:46 p.m, telling them that he was asleep and that I wasn't totally comfortable. I told them that I really didn't want to piss him off. I didn't trust him. He scared me a little, and that I'd stay there that night, but I wasn't going to spend tomorrow there, and that I'd be home in the morning. They told me to leave now while he was still asleep, but also agreed that I might be overreacting a bit. I jokingly told them that I wouldn't leave until I got my gas money. They agreed, joking back with me. They talked to me for a bit while we slept, acknowledging my worries and telling me to keep them informed, but also joking around and lifting my spirits a bit. I started to feel like maybe I was just worrying myself for no reason. At 7:49 p.m, I texted them that he had woken up, because I could hear him getting dressed in the other room. I turned my phone on vibrate so he wouldn't get curious to who I had been talking to. He came in and kissed me on the forehead and sat down on the couch next to me. We talked normally for a bit, before he made a really shitty comment about how much he hated cops, and how he would probably shoot one if he got the chance. I cocked my head as I listened and furrowed my brow, asking, "You realize my dad is a cop, right?" He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Yeah, I remember you telling me." But he gave a chuckle and followed up with, "But of course not him." My stomach dropped again, and his eyes held mine for a little too long. I didn't waver. I'm a pretty defiant girl, and I didn't say anything. I wasn't going to back down either, and soon he looked away. Quickly after that, he asked me if I was hungry. I told him I was, and he called an order of pizza for carry-out, as we had planned a pizza and movie night that night. He kept calling me his baby, but he would barely hold any eye contact with me, other than that awkward time after I mentioned my father. I quickly texted the group chat as he got his shoes on and such, letting them know that I was still really uncomfortable, and mentioning that he refused to hold any eye contact with me at all, other than in really long and uncomfortable bursts. I joked with them that I would stay there for the pizza since I'm a chubby girl. While we waited for the pizza to be made, we had about 15 minutes before we had to go pick it up. We laid on the couch, with him sitting between my legs, my back to the armrest. He played with my feet, splaying out my toes to where it hurt and also digging his nails into the underside of my toes. I would flinch, but he seemed to like my flinching away. So soon, I just gripped my teeth and let it happen. He asked me what size my feet were, and I told him, and he seemed pleased with the answer. I am a pretty tall girl, 5'10", and so I have pretty large feet. But he also made a comment about how he wanted to keep them for himself, which made my skin crawl. I am a very defiant and generally decently sassy girl, but I don't enjoy confrontation, and this man scared me, so I felt frozen. I texted my friends that he was playing with my feet, and jokingly sent them, "Is the pizza even worth it?" My friends have decent senses of humor, and the girl replied, "If it ain't Pizza Hut, it's not." Talking to them gave me a bit of security and relief, and I kept telling myself that I was probably overthinking some stuff. My guy friend from the group chat was worried about me and telling me to get out of there. I wanted to, but at this point, I felt like I was in too deep, and I was honestly scared he was going to hurt me or try to stop me if I tried to leave. I decided I would eat the pizza with him and see if it got any better. We got into his car and went to get the pizza. And on the way there, I mentioned that I really liked this little town he lived in, as it was similar to where I go to college. And as we passed a building, he mentioned that he used to be a yell leader there. This was the first normal intro to conversation he had said all night, so I asked him how he liked doing that. His answer was, "I liked the guys, but I fucking hated the girls. Dumb bitches didn't know shit. I actually threatened one of the girls once that I was going to give her a Colombian necktie, and my coach told me that I should go through with it." I, being a dumbass and somewhat sheltered girl, asked what a Colombian necktie was, and my stomach flopped as he explained it. "I highly doubt your coach would tell you to go through with that," I said in a dry tone, testifying at his story. He just told me whatever and drove on. He then proceeded to dig his thumb into my leg. I pushed his hand off of my leg and told him that him digging his thumb into my leg like that hurt. And he just looked over at me, gave me a huge smile, and said that he was testing me. Thankfully, we got to the pizza place quickly, and he got out to get the pizza. I told him I would stay in the car, but really, it was just so that I could text my friends. I told them what had happened, and I considered bailing out of the car right then. But as the thought crossed my mind, he was already coming back out of the store with the pizza and getting in the car. I put my phone under my right leg and looked straight ahead as we drove away from the pizza place, instantly regretting not getting out of the car while he was away. As we drove, he asked me about my parents, a relatively normal question, or so I thought. I told him that I was really close to my mother, but had been closer to my dad when I was younger. I mentioned that I had talked to my dad on the phone on the drive up. He grabbed my leg again and asked with a gut-wrenching inflection in his voice, "Yeah, I bet you're a daddy's girl. You sure look like one. Do you love your daddy?" And although I wanted to scream, I turned to him, looked him dead in the eye with a bland expression on my face, and said, "Yep." Apparently, that wasn't the reaction he was expecting, because after that, he shut up and didn't say anything until we got into the house. I walked up to his door carrying the pizza, but I felt like I was in a dream. My legs were walking forward, but I was screaming at them to run the other way. However, I couldn't, because I knew my keys were still sitting on the arm of his couch. I decided to play the role and get out when I could. We ate pizza. I watched him put my pizza on my plate, actually worried that he was going to try and drug me. I ate slowly, trying to prolong the time I could spend out of his arms, because the entire night, other than when he was sleeping, he had been touching me one way or another. I had already excused myself for the bathroom once, and I knew I couldn't go again without raising suspicion, so I was stone-faced, trying to keep my panic at bay. He turned on a movie as we ate, and I actually got into it a bit. It definitely wasn't something I would usually watch, but I think I just needed a distraction. During the movie, a girl started crying and hyperventilating because she had watched someone get shot. He laughed and shook his head. I looked at him a little warily, but didn't say anything. You know, I dated a girl who would have panic attacks. He said panic attacks in the most mocking tone I had ever heard before. She'd have them at night, and I knew she was faking that shit. So I would cover her face with a pillow and lay on her until she shut up. She'd fight it for a while, but after a little while, she'd stop. He said it so casually, and my heart flared for that girl. That's fucked up, I told him blandly. Why? He asked. Why would you treat her like that? I asked, obviously a little heated. He laughed, obviously enjoying how upset I was getting. Because I couldn't fucking sleep. So go sleep on the couch, I said, my tone getting flat and obviously over this shit. He gave me a deadly look and said, I don't sleep on the couch. I shrugged and laughed mockingly at his macho man routine, trying to seem indifferent, although I was actually scared shitless, and said, whatever. I turned back to the TV, but I could feel his eyes on me, glaring a hole into my face. I didn't waver and focused on what the actors were saying. Soon, I felt him shift, so he was practically laying on me again. We watched for just a few minutes, and my mind raced. I am an overthinker, so thoughts of what he'd do to me if I stayed there flickered through my mind. I then realized that I didn't know where my phone was. I looked around as best as I could, and I saw it on the floor. I reached down and scooted it closer towards me, before he grabbed my other hand and started sucking on my fingers. My toes curled in disgust, and I wanted to vomit when I thought about the fact that he had actually touched my bare flesh earlier. I grabbed my phone with my free hand as he was distracted and set it on my chest. I took my hand away from him, and he let it go. After a few more minutes, he grabbed it again, and I took it away before he could kiss it again. What the fuck, babe? He asked. I wanted to scream that I wasn't his babe, but I said in a matter-of-fact tone, I'm not in the mood, and I want to watch the movie. He muttered under his breath, just barely audible enough for me to hear over the TV. Bitch, shut the fuck up. My stomach shriveled up at his words, and my skin felt like it was on fire. The feeling of rage and fear made me feel sick. Excuse me? I asked. He looked at me, surprised that I had heard him, and we held eye contact for way too long. His eyes were unwavering and deadly, and he was waiting for a reaction. I decided I wouldn't give him one, so I looked back at the TV, but my skin pricked into goosebumps to the point that they actually hurt. Once he also looked away, I texted the group chat. I directed my text to the girl. I said, I need you to call me in tears saying that your mum is in hospital. Make it believable. He's right next to me. I need to get out of here, please. She agreed, and a few minutes later, she called me. I answered, and she put on a show about how her mum wasn't doing well, and that she needed me to be there. I agreed, and kept the phone to my ear as I quickly got up and put my shoes on, while also getting my jacket and keys. He stood as well, and was obviously unhappy, towering over me as I tried to get my stuff together. I hung up the phone after putting on a pretty decent show, and looked to him. I explained to him that I needed to go, but I would text him. Before he could protest, I was at the door, where I had failed to realize that there were 3 different locks that he had locked. I fumbled with them, my hands shaking. He kept his deadly gaze on me and asked, You'll come back in the morning, right? To make it believable, I turned and gave him a kiss. Of course, I just got to deal with this. Look, I'm sorry, I said. He perked up at this and agreed, unlocking the 3rd lock for me. I shut the door behind me and practically sprinted to my car. I pulled away quickly, and as I got to the stoplight a few blocks away, I broke down and sobbed. A rush of relief came over me, as well as the realization that I had trusted this man, who was completely different than who he seemed to be. I felt so stupid. I called my friend, the girl, and let her know that I was safe and that I was driving over the next 2 hours home. By now, it was well after 10:30 at night. I texted the group chat to let my guy friend know as well, and my foot was heavy on the gas as I drove. I checked the rearview mirror multiple times, hoping that he wasn't following me. Tears of relief and regret streamed down my face for almost half the drive home, but stopped as I finally hit the interstate. I felt safe and free from him as I took the on-ramp towards my home. My skin has been crawling since I got home, and I haven't been able to get the things that he said out of my head. Moral of the story, don't trust people you've only spoken with over the phone. Not everything is as it seems.